And intellectual jobs are solved with a deeper understanding and, more importantly, severe amount of clarity. Because the funny part of testing is we are trying to find what is not there. Stuff that is missing, stuff that is, that's the kind of stuff that you're trying to find. So a deeper and a clearer understanding of the problem actually solves quite a bit of problems. Now, if everything was so clear, you and I would not be required, right? So the bottom line is, clarity means asking more interesting questions at the end of it. Hopefully, answers to that will give you clarity. No answers to that will give you bugs. Right? So what is important to understand? How were you taught concepts in school? Young, particularly young. How were you taught? Were you given a book and asked to mug? Young, really young. How did you learn good concepts? Read and repeat. Okay, a little boring, but okay. Have you listened to stories? You were taught morals with stories. You were taught interesting concepts with stories, converted to experiments. And we all know we understood that better. Alright? And therefore, in the entire process, our clarity of the problem and the solution became one clear, understood, and of course. So, a prerequisite to good problem-solving understanding is really about storytelling. You want to understand the software system that you want to test, tell a story. Reading a requirement is read and repeat, it's boring. The more detailed the requirement, so to speak, if ever somebody gave it to you, is more boring. Having no software and having an interesting conversation with somebody is fun, as long as it's engaging. Otherwise, you and I are going to sit, what should I ask? And you're kind of wondering, ask me whatever you want. Never cuts, right? So storytelling is a very fundamentally human trait. We all are very engaged when we tell a story, and therefore when we are talking about anything, any aspect of understanding, whether it is about the product, or it's about the test cases, or it's about some report that we produce, storification is a very interesting way of understanding. Keep that in mind for a second. So now that we understand the problem, the next thing is about, hey, I want to solve the problem. And that's the next question that comes. So why do we tell stories? To engage, to connect, to be able to understand something deeply, and more importantly, to get a human touch. Remember, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We test software, we're still a human who's doing something. And therefore, if you don't engage at a human level, nothing really happens. If I'm not able to empathize and dream and imagine the poor customer using my software and possibly how he might suffer, I will never be able to do a good job. So empathy is a very fundamental trait, right? So human touch is something that we never forget at any point. And that's really why storytelling is useful. This is describing. So I'm going to give it a name to it. So I'm going to say the approach to understanding, which is in a form of storytelling and storification, is highly descriptive in nature. There are various forms of describing. You read a newspaper, it is a certain type of description. Dry, boring, unbiased. That's a style of writing. You read a storybook, engaging, interesting, wanting you to turn to the next page. If you watch one of your favorite serials, whatever be the language, so to speak, they cut you off at a point so that you come back tomorrow. That's engaging. That style is quite different. So descriptive approach here is we want to talk about a description which is not just statistical, factual. It is about talking from a user's perspective, and that's really where it connects. So if I want to understand anything, whether it is a product or any artifact of the product, we want to convert that into a story. That's the whole idea, and that approach is descriptive. Now, having understood the problem, quite naturally, we want to find a solution. So what's the solution? A set of rules. Follow this, 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 this. If you follow this well, something happens. Hopefully something correct happens. So problem solving is one part, a decent understanding. In the process of understanding, interesting questions arise. And ultimately formulating a solution. And I'm going to talk about applications of this thinking in the context of testing as we go further down in the next couple of slides. So when you say a rule is nothing but a set of conditions. Do this first, do this next. If this is true, then do this next, and so on and so on. And when you form a string these rules and form connections of these various conditions, you get a rule, and that really is a prescription. So, I like the word because descriptive, prescriptive kind of rhymes, you know. Nice, that's all. That's where the term came from. So I'm saying, when you want to solve a problem, if you want to think better, think on these lines. Human from that perspective, anything that you want, engage with the story. And then convert that into a set of rules, if you will, which is nothing but various conditions to follow, and therefore it becomes a prescription. Color is very interesting. I'm not sure if you're able to see, but I can see bright and nice on my iPad, so bad luck. So describing a problem to understand is very subjective. How you describe is different from how I describe, and very quite different from what he would do. It's very subjective. It's nice and warm if you have a human feel. Rather than saying this software, press this button, do this kind of stuff, now you're saying, you know, just imagine this guy comes in the morning, then he does this, then he reads this is how it happens. You know, this is what he's very happy about, he feels extraordinarily thrilled. Then, you know, it's a nice way to describe it. That's warm. Normally, subjective storytelling is always fuzzy. That's how stories are. But on the other hand, solution. There, these come down, so if you want to see here, it's very objective. Here is a set of rules, 1, 2, 3 conditions. Very objective, very cold, very clear. You seen Munna Bhai movie? You know the shot where first time the principal of the college comes and says, see my hand? Kamta nahi. I can cut anybody. No shakes. You know why? Because I don't get involved with the subject. And who's the subject? The poor patient in the operating theatre. So he's treating him as a subject so that he can cut open whatever part. Very objective, very cold, needed. If you get emotionally attached to the gentleman, it's very difficult to do decent surgery. Right? That is initially. To understand the problem, I'll talk to you nicely and find out that, you know, your kidney is blown. Then I will do something about it. So both are two antitheses. One is subjective, another is subjective. One is very warm, another is very cold. Another is very fuzzy, another is very clear. And that's how it's supposed to be. And that's really what this is all about. So let's talk a little more about what it means as an application in 4 parts. I want to understand a product. I want to understand a feature. I want to understand something. What would you do? You can do very many things. If you have something to read about, you can read. If you have something to play with, you can play. So you had a software, a trial version, it's an experiment, play with it. If you had something to read about, you can read. If you got something that people have written about as comments, good or bad, you can read them. If you had past issues and defects, you can read them. But it's a boring job. Very boring job. So what you want to do is you want to storify them. So what is storify? Start with a who. Who does what? When does he do? How much does he do? And that's where the story becomes more and more interesting. So you're starting to take a dry document or a dry description and convert it into something very nice that is engaging. In the process, get into it. And therefore, what you really are asking is this. Who uses what? And what do they expect of that? And how should it work? Where do I use this? What environment? How much would I use it? Frequency, volume. And therefore how serious, how important, how critical it is. Is it new or is it old or is it unmodified or modified? What kind of feature or requirement is it? It's not always a new feature most of the time, right? Then finally, what is the value? Perception of that particular element. If it's a feature, how does the user perceive the value? Is it serious? Is it flimsy? Is it okay? Is it extremely important? So when you kind of take a piece, whether you take a feature at a time, a module at a time, whatever be the element that you're trying to understand, the whole idea is storify, that's described. So what is a prescription? Here I've tried to put a prescription by saying, you know what, these are the elements, my friend. Here is a little set of conditions that I'm trying to put and say understanding requires largely these why, what, who, when, how much. So I put a little mind map life picture and I'm saying go develop that from there. So here's a bunch of conditions that you use, and these conditions you go populate. And in the process, you get a little more cleaner notion of saying, okay, now I know there are 5 kinds of users. It works on 3 different kinds of environments. This is the kind of usage pattern. These are the various attributes that it expects. Now you're converting that into ultimately some kind of structurization that helps you to take it forward in terms of meaning. And that is one of the applications is taking the process of describing, prescribing, describing, prescribing. So now, post understanding, what else can we do? What could be a second application? Yeah, I have now characterized the system by saying, okay, this is what the product or the application is. So I want to set up a very clear baseline. So what is the baseline? I really want to be clear and say, okay, these are the 3 features that I want to test, or these are the 3 requirements, or 3 flows, or whatever the list, as you can see, is listed as what to test. What do we want to do? We want to be very clear, what do I want to test, and what do I want to test it for? What should it satisfy? Right? And that's what that is. So now, when we are trying to ultimately get a simple prescriptive form of a notation which says, this should satisfy that. So what is that CC? I call it cleanliness criteria. If you'd like something else as the criteria, please put whatever you like, X of 10 is. Whatever as a criteria of correctness, quality criteria, whatever you want. And that's really what it is. So when you want to set up a clarity in terms of a baseline, you have to be clear in a way of what you're wishing to accomplish. Because you see, the problem of good testing is not about doing more work. It is about exactly the opposite, doing least amount of work. And to do least amount of work, it requires exceptional clarity. So as a developer, if you're a good developer, what would you do? You would think really hard to find out how not to write code. That's what I did for the first 15 years of my life. How not to write code. Meaning, how to write least amount of code. And that's quite naturally is what you would do as a good tester. To be able to do least amount of work. Meaning, how can I think better so that I can arrange my piece of work. So first thing that happens is a clarity in terms of understanding. Second happens to be in terms of clarity of expectations. And in the process of trying to storify, you start finding holes. To be able to put them into a form which allows you to kind of lock it down. Think of this as a little matrix here. It's a very simple, cold matrix. There's nothing great about it. In effect, those cells that you see here, you will fill them with some information in a way. That this meets that. It's a tick mark. You can qualify the tick mark with something. So you say it's supposed to meet a certain security requirement as one such criteria. You will qualify as to what that is. And that's really what that is. When we do this, we start empathy. Empathy comes into picture. Because now we are starting to think from that guy's perspective, not just saying it should meet performance requirement, it should meet security requirement, or it should be whatever else required. That's too dry. It doesn't connect. And therefore, you don't get deep enough. And that's where this 2-part is necessary. Third part, behavior. So you want to describe the actual behavior of a feature or a requirement. One of the normal ways is to describe in some form. Mechanically do this, then it goes here, then it does this, then it collects this, it stores this, it processes this, does this, etc. To be able to ultimately do a good design, that means I must have a fair amount of clarity in the way it is supposed to work, the way it is not supposed to work. What would be nice is to storify the behavior. One, describe. So I call this a descriptive notation, which means you describe the behavior, so to speak. What do you really want as prescription? A list of conditions. So you want to say, this is what happens. It takes these inputs according to condition 1. If it is true, it goes and checks for this condition 2. If it is true, then it checks the condition 3. So in effect, you're trying to put a little more meaningful behavioral order. So if you want to give it a nice glorified name, you can call it behavior-driven test. If you want to be more interesting about it, you can call it as a part of model-driven test. Basically, highly prescriptive in nature, highly objective in nature. So when you put that in that form, you will only have 5 different scenarios to test, and no more, no less. There is no guesswork. There are 6 scenarios or 25 scenarios. If your conditions are understood correctly, and the understanding of that will come only from a meaningful description, you will only get 6. I mean 5, because there will be 4 conditions here. So you will always get 4 plus 1. If it has been 5 conditions, you get 5 plus 1. There is no magic in this entire stuff, right? So now, what does it help you to do? It helps you to be damn sure that you don't need any more scenarios. That's what it tries to tell you. And that's what behavior-driven models are always about. Right? And therefore, again, a scorification is again follows descriptive, prescriptive notation. Lastly, this is something that we possibly see, we possibly even do. And if you're on the other side of the table as a lead or a manager or somebody who's managing the project, it is the most boring thing. Seeing a bunch of charts. So very commonly we probably see a variety of different charts. Some are generated by tools, some are generated by us. So it says, here is the little pie chart of the number of issues and the distribution of issues. Or here is a run rate of chart which gives you how much of tests have been executed or how much has been blocked. Or what is the number of rate of delay. Charts are the most boring thing. They convey nothing actually. What is the purpose of reporting?